This episode is brought to you by the Command Presence Leadership Institute. Find out more by visiting commandpresence.net.
Welcome to the Faces of Leadership with Michael Warren. Be the leader you wish that you had.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Faces of Leadership podcast, where we believe that leadership is about two things. It's about people and it's about actions. We talk with leaders from across society who are stepping up to do what they can, where they are with what they have. The question, though, is what can we learn from them? What can we learn from each other as we strive to be the leader that we wish we had? Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Warren, and I'm your host. Thank you for being with us today. Today's kind of I say this about every week, but it's true. I'm really excited about the conversation today. And if I'm to be totally transparent with my guest here and with our listeners, he and I had a phone conversation that I wish I had recorded because I thought the conversation went so well. I thought it would have been a very good episode in and of itself. But unfortunately for him, he has to talk to me again because I didn't record it. So let me go ahead and give you a little bit of information about our guest. He has more than 3 decades of experience in law enforcement, healthcare, security, and fire service. Since 2018, he has served as the Senior Director of Public Safety and Security for the University of Michigan and University of Michigan healthcare system. Now, folks, I'm going to interject here a little bit of freelance here. If you're not from the state of Michigan and you haven't had any dealings with, as we refer to it, U of M, the U of M healthcare system, it's a very broad network of healthcare providers and physical buildings. It's massive. He is a certified police officer for the university, and he manages a full-time team, including trainers, a K-9 team, security staff, and a community policing unit, which is something I'm really interested to talk about. Everybody, if you could please welcome my guest today, Senior Director Brian Urich. Director, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, Mike, thanks for having me. And I almost started laughing when you brought up the phone call because that's exactly how I came away from that call. I was like, what a great meeting. We were talking about different books and real positive meeting. And when you don't expect it, that's what was so powerful. I didn't expect that because you and I had never met. So great call.
It's always disappointing to me because then I get on the episode and sometimes I don't sound quite so intelligent. And I'm like, but I promise you folks, I was smart on the phone call. On the prep work, I was good to go.
I'm the same way.
So let's go ahead and get started here. You have a wide array of leadership experiences, and your leadership journey really kind of started not at the agency you're with now, but it started at your previous agency. So, and it's kind of a unique agency in the way that it's set up and it's organized. So if you don't mind, can you tell us just a little bit about the agency that you retired from?
Yeah, absolutely. So my entire life growing up as a child, I wanted to be a police officer and a firefighter, but I couldn't decide what I wanted to do. And when I was in college at Ferris State University, I took a class by Captain Burt Bell of the Big Rapids Fire Department. He talked about public safety agencies where you could do both. By luck of the draw, a friend of mine said, hey, Brian, let's go take this test down in Kalamazoo for Kalamazoo Public Safety. And I applied, and sure enough, I was very, very lucky. I was fortunate enough to get hired. And it turned out Kalamazoo Public Safety, where I did my entire career, is the largest fully integrated police, fire, and medical EMS department in the entire United States, meaning everyone's a police officer, everyone's a firefighter, and everyone's a medical first responder. So it's very, very just an exciting career.
Let's talk about that for a little bit, because for our listeners, in most agencies, in most cities and most jurisdictions, you have a police department which handles law enforcement services. You will have a fire department that handles fire-related things, and they may do medicals as well. And then in many cases, you have a separate EMS system, which the agency that I serve with, it was contracted. It was a private organization that we contracted with to provide transport and that type of thing. So for all of those things to be under one roof, that had to present some very unique challenges from a leadership perspective.
It really did, because when I was hired back in 1990, they had already merged the departments, but there were still members of the firefighting union and the police officers union. So we were still trying to merge cultures because, as you know, you can combine different parts of an organization, but being able to merge and work together as a team and merge those cultures is the most unique, probably the most difficult thing that you could ever do. When I look back, we look at what's the majority of what we do. Well, 93% of all of our days were focused on that police work, driving around a police car. About 6% of what we did was medical, responding to people having heart attacks or trouble breathing, things like that. And then the smallest percentage was the actual fire response, responding to car accidents and house fires and garage fires, etc.
From a budgetary perspective, the activities that you spent the least amount of time on often encumbered a lot of your budget, because apparatus to fight fires doesn't come cheap. And training properly to fight fires in as safe as a manner as possible, that also doesn't come cheap. But when things go wrong in that area right there, they go catastrophically wrong, don't they?
It does. And it's what we call a low frequency, high risk event. House fires, we know statistically throughout the United States, have decreased dramatically in the last 60 or 70 years. We have better fire prevention. We have better materials. We have better training, et cetera. Our communities are more engaged with that. So we know when we do have a real fire, it's a very, very high risk, low frequency event that we have to train for. And our most important resource, as we all know, is our people. And so being able to have a robust training organization as part of your public safety department that keeps you current in all three of those disciplines was probably what I saw the most difficult part of public safety, was keeping current and keeping everyone trained up to the standards in all three disciplines.
And you brought up another interesting topic I'd like to touch on here. You talked about when the departments came together, it wasn't just a merging of personnel, it was also a merging of cultures. Oftentimes in today's world, we hear about corporate mergers. And I guess I've never really considered so much the difficulty that must present to leaders. How do we make these two cultures into one, and not just two cultures into one, but in one that is productive and driving towards the agency or organization's mission?
Extremely difficult, and it's a great question. Getting engagement at every level and letting people know that they are a respected part of that organization, regardless of what position they hold. And probably the best way to explain that is a story where I was a young lieutenant who in police work, just like where you were at. You're kind of a shift supervisor at that point, a shift commander. And I go to a house that's on fire. And when I get there, and in the first few minutes of a house fire, it's critical to make the appropriate decisions. And I get there, and a very large house in the Vine neighborhood is on fire. And all of the frontline firefighter staff, some of them who are still firefighters, they've not cross-trained. They are in what we called at the time a manpower pool. I got to the fire and I was quite overwhelmed, so much stimulus. I did not have nearly the experience of the people in the manpower pool that I was supervising. And after a couple of minutes, I'd made one or two decisions. I turned and I looked at this team of men and women, all of which were much older than me, although I was technically their boss. And I looked at them and I said, "What am I forgetting?" And I'll never forget the looks on their face. They said, "What?" I said, "What am I forgetting to do?" And the one guy said, "No one has ever asked me my opinion at a fire." I said, "Well, if I don't get your opinion, there's a good chance we're going to turn this house into a parking lot." And it was like magic. Great people. They came together. They offered incredible feedback. They took over, and really they saved that house because of their expertise. nothing that I did at all. And all it took was engaging them in the critical decisions at the moment.
From a leadership perspective, has it been your experience that in situations like that, where what you were really saying was, I don't know all the answers, I'm unsure of what maybe the best path is, being vulnerable like that in front of the people that you supervise, did they look at you from a different perspective? Was it better or worse after you were willing to be vulnerable in front of them?
Oh, absolutely. It was incredibly valuable, and it was always better after that because you showed not only vulnerability, but you showed your willingness to ask for help, to let people know that you don't know the answers, and to understand that they have expertise that is invaluable to that critical incident. And I would go on to learn that on so many different calls for service over the course of the years, just because we were a large department and doing different things every day.
Would you agree with me that because you were willing to ask for help and it was okay for you not to know everything, that unofficially, without saying a word, you made it okay for them to be that way? So they were more likely to ask for help. They were more willing to acknowledge that they didn't know everything.
Oh, absolutely. And as you know, what that does is those types of critical incidents where you can actually have that good communication, where you can have that, what's most important, which is that trust. That trust helps form that relationship, which then ultimately leads to a more effective way to deal with whatever that problem or that critical incident is.
And Director, maybe your experience was different than mine, but I remember when I finally acknowledged that I didn't have all the answers, it felt liberating to me because I didn't have to have this facade any longer that I was the omniscient person just because I had formal rank with the people on my shift.
Oh, absolutely. That is, if there's anything you can teach new leaders, it's to understand and respect and continue to earn the trust of the people who you work with, the people who you work for, and the people who work for you. And being able to tell everyone that, look, I'm a human, I make mistakes, I need your help, I need your expertise. That is really the basis for an incredible team.
Well, and it's interesting. I have found that just about everything has both a good side and a bad side. And so, the good side of admitting that you don't know something is that you gain the trust and you allow others to shine. But there are leaders that don't take efforts after that to increase their knowledge, to increase their base so that next time they do know, because there's always going to be something that we don't know. And so would you agree with me that one of the things that we need to teach young leaders is it's okay not to know, but it's not okay to stay that way once it's been identified?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's where not only to teach new young leaders that, but to make sure that we set those young leaders up for success, to make sure that we have a development program, a mentoring program, complete transparency so that as they move along, they feel empowered to ask questions, to voice concerns. And probably, I would say, Mike, the one story that for me personally really drives home the importance of that is basically I had just been promoted to sergeant, which is a first line supervisor. I'd spent 2 or 3 days with a senior sergeant driving around, and they said, okay, you're now on your own as a supervisor. Believe it or not, after 3 days, I'm sure your experience was similar to that back then. So it's my first night by myself as a supervisor, and I'm about 2 minutes into my shift. The alarm goes off for a garage fire attached to a house, fully involved. And I am scared to death. And I drive there. The fire was on Mount Olivet. And Mike, I got there first. And my voice is trembling on the radio. I'm trying to call out what I see. And I see a garage attached to the house, fully involved in flames. But the house is not really on fire yet. And here comes the fire truck with one person on it. And the gentleman's name is Dave Toth. I'm in charge of Dave, but Dave has more experience than I do, has more time on the job. And when Dave got there, I looked at him, I said, Dave, I want you to connect the fire truck to the fire hydrant to make sure we have an adequate supply of water. And I'll never forget, Dave looked at me and said, Brian, that is the wrong decision. I disagree. And I said, what? He goes, what we need to do is we need to put our gear on really quick. We need to climb into the living room with a hose and stop the fire from advancing into the house. The next people who get here, they will hook up the hydrant. They'll take care of that part. And I looked at him, Mike, and I said, that's a lot better idea. So we went in and we saved the house. So after we're done, I was mortified. It's my first day on the job, my first decision I ever made as a leader, and it was completely wrong. Over time, we did an after-action review. I took 3 lessons from that I turned into 3 rules. Lesson number 1, rule number 1, trust your staff, trust your team. Had I not trusted Dave Toth, we wouldn't have made that decision and we would have burned the house down. Rule number 1, lesson number 1, rule number 2 is create a culture where your staff feel free to disagree. Had Dave not felt comfortable telling me, Brian, you're wrong, I would have burned that house to the ground. And then finally, rule number 3, lesson number 3 is always remember the next person on scene of any critical incident, any decision, any problem, always has a better idea, regardless of their rank, because they don't have tunnel vision. Dave got there and he had a different perspective, and his perspective helped save the house. So though I know that was a long story, but those 3 rules, I drive that home when I meet with every new sergeant about the importance of that trust and empowering people and letting them disagree.
I would propose that without trust, number 2 is not going to happen. That they're not going to feel free. They're not going to feel safe in disagreeing with you. Man, I'm telling you, the difference in perspective that experience provides, the difference in perspective that training provides, and the difference in perspective that physical proximity can provide in many cases. In this case, it saved a house. And the truth of the matter is, at the end of the day, if you had lost the house, people might would have talked to you and said, hey, did you consider doing this? But you probably weren't going to get in trouble. But he recognized that this is not only the better way of doing it, but my guess would be it was also safer, because once the house is involved, now we have a much bigger fire to contend with, which increases the danger to not only you, but also to the people that work for you.
Mike, that's a great perspective. And in fact, having told that story many times, no one's ever brought that point up, but that's another value right here, a different person's perspective. That's great what you just said. And you're absolutely right. Had the whole house been on fire, well, then there's a new dynamic. And there's a much greater risk than just the garage. So yeah, there's a constant leadership lessons that were because of that incident. And I'm sure in your experience, you gain so much from mistakes that you make. And if you can look back and evaluate, one of the things we did in Kalamazoo and we do here at Michigan Medicine is we do quick after action reviews. And when we go around and we talk about a critical incident, we always add something. And this is the hardest thing for people to do. We go around the room and we say, okay, we had this critical incident. Let's each talk for 1 minute about what happened. But we're going to answer 3 questions. What's one thing that could have gone better in the incident? What's one thing that went well in the incident? And then here's the tough one. Number 3 is, what's one thing that you personally think you could have done better? And that's the hardest thing for people to do, is reflect back and say, how can I improve? But once you create that culture, and always make sure you're the first person to go. I always say, I'll be the first person to stand up and say, I could have done this better. And that's how you get better as a team, those after action reviews.
I'm a big believer in safety. In the fire service, in law enforcement, in the military, safety is many times about physical safety. But in the corporate world, it could be about career safety. But we have to make it safe for people after the incident's over with, to go back and be completely honest so that it's safer the next time that something happens, because it's about this idea of continuous improvement. I'm a big believer in it, and I think we should be striving for it. I think that people are more likely to buy in if we say, how can we make it safer? In the corporate world, how can I make my job safer because I make better decisions? How can I make my job safer because I increase profits? It requires a transparency and a willingness to bear it all that perhaps is lacking because there's a lack of trust between the people in formal leadership positions and the people doing the job.
You are absolutely right. And we all do it where we don't get out of our offices enough to interact with our frontline staff, to build those relationships so people feel comfortable enough to say, this is a problem, because they don't know you. Because I'm probably the biggest one that's guilty of this, is, you're trying to lead, but you're trying to lead by email. You can't lead by email. You can lead by getting out. We're very fortunate here at Michigan Medicine in that probably one of the biggest things they push in addition to safety is, as leaders, you need to get out of your office. You need to round at night. You need to round in the morning. You need to get out and interact with your staff and see what's happening and ask them, what is one thing we can do better? And it's amazing what you find out when you actually get out of your office and engage with your staff.
General James Mattis is one of my heroes. If anybody's been to one of my classes or listened to any of our podcasts, they probably know that. And he said that the leader should be getting out there where the action is the hottest, because that is where the people are the most tired. He said, but the leaders, too often, they act like potted plants. We can't do that, because when you get out there and you talk to the people where the action is the hottest and where they're tired, because the truth of the matter is, when they're tired, their filters are also down a little bit. So you're likely to get a more accurate description of what is going on in those situations than any survey that you put out.
I agree. And I think you and I were talking about books that the last time we were chatting, and Jack Enter, who was former law enforcement, he wrote a great book, Proactive Leadership Strategies. And one of the things he says is try not to ever have a formal meeting. If you bring people into your office where they're uncomfortable, they're not going to be as open. Have your meetings at the gas pump. Talk to your staff while they're getting gas. Go to where, give them the respect of going out and engaging them when they're on their shift, sit in their car. I tell the story of in Kalamazoo, and certainly I don't mean anything negative about our chiefs, but I was a frontline officer, and I forgot what chief it was. The chiefs came out and they said, we're going to ride along every month. We're going to come out one night every month. Well, in my entire career, I think I saw them one time. So it just doesn't happen. And we need to make sure as leaders that we learn from that and try to do better. And I'm the first one to say I'm the worst at it, because we're all creatures of habit.
It's important for leaders to give their subordinates the authority to call me out when I'm not keeping my word. If I have committed to you that I am going to ride with you once a month and I don't do it, your responsibility is to call me out. In law enforcement, right now there's a big push on the duty to intervene. It's been my experience that if we have people internally who intervene with leadership not doing what they're supposed to do, we have much less reason to intervene out on the street or intervene when we're dealing with customers or citizens, whoever. If we have those tough conversations with leadership, that they have to do what they said they were going to do.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's very easy to set a lofty goal and say you're going to be out there every night or every week or hold me accountable for this. And your actions will always speak louder than your words. People are watching, and they're watching to see what what you're going to do, and if you're really going to follow through on what you say.
All right. But you eventually, Kalamazoo was a great place to work, but eventually, as happens, we get older, careers or chapters in our lives come to a close, and somehow you end up at the University of Michigan. And as complex as Kalamazoo was, I would have to imagine that there is a whole new level of complexity when we're talking about working in a university system like you are?
Well, there certainly is. So I was very fortunate. I was able to retire from Kalamazoo Public Safety. I retired as their assistant chief of operations, and just a wonderful career. Enjoyed every single minute of it. The men and women there are just absolutely incredible. The community relationships, phenomenal. So when I left, and I immediately I got into healthcare and realized how much it was similar in so many ways to the situations that I was dealing with in my community here. The community in healthcare, the community just goes straight up in the air versus sprawling out, but it's the same concepts. What's unique about the University of Michigan, I always say this, is that I am always the dumbest guy in the room. The level of talent.
It's kind of like this podcast for me.
Oh, man. The level of intelligence. I will get emails from some of our executives here. I'll need a thesaurus next to me because I won't even understand at least three or four of the words. But they are so passionate about what they do and so caring. And it is incredible to see the level of commitment. Our frontline nurses, the staff, the doctors. But what we forget about all the people, our environmental services, our people who run valet, our people who are patient transport, so pivotal to the success of our doctors and our nurses, and we forget about them. But yeah, it's an incredible place to work with just absolute amazing talent.
To show you how my brain works and scare you a little bit, when you start talking about the people you work with, I immediately went to a Big Bang Theory episode because I'm a huge fan of the show. And Penny's sitting there at the table with the group of people. She goes, "You're a doctor. You're a doctor. You're a doctor. Howard, you know a bunch of doctors." Well, I'm Howard. You know what I mean? It's just like there's always these people that are so much. I feel like I'm sitting at the feet of these wise philosophers, and I just try to soak it in and try to find out, okay, how can I apply this in my profession? How can I apply this in my job? And so I want to bring up a couple of things that you and I talked about, if I could, because some of this stuff, man, it really hit home to me. The way you described it was, Mike, healthcare is a healing environment. And when you said that, the reason why it hit home to me so much was because that seems to be, at first glance, that your role and the people you're working with, that maybe you guys are at odds. And then you started talking about, hey, Mike, you know, the number one patient need is assurance. And that's one of the things that me and my people are able to provide to help it be a healing environment.
So you either took good notes or you have a great memory. I'm not sure which.
Yes, we'll go with both.
So, a doctor years ago gave me a book, and she said, her name was Leslie Dreco. She now works at Cleveland Clinic, and she said, Brian, a lot of the things that I see the department doing are things that are in this book. If Disney ran your hospital, 9.5 things you do differently. And when I read it, I was almost like my aha moment, where I realized it's not about enforcement. It's about how can we support the people who are not only providing care, but the people who are coming here for care. And what you realize is, first and foremost, there is no one coming to this hospital who wants to be here. No one's coming here that wants to be here that's a patient because they've got a health issue that requires, unless they're having a baby, they probably don't want to be here, number one. Number two, and this is the biggest thing to take away, is it's one thing to make sure people are safe. It's an entire different thing to make sure they feel safe. And if we can't make sure they feel safe, we've not accomplished our job. It's the same thing in law enforcement. It's the same thing in healthcare. The only way, Mike, I can make you feel safe is to, number one, build real relationships with you understand what you and your team are going through, because what you're experiencing, let's say on floor number 10 in your unit that does this one discipline, could be completely different than what one of our clinic staff are experiencing who sees a different type of patient. And my job is to not only support you, but to make sure I engage with you proactively to understand your needs and be there to support you in whatever that particular situation is.
Well, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it would seem to me that in your environment, dealing with the maternity ward is much different than dealing with the emergency room. It seems like it would be difficult for you as the leader to have your people ready for both environments. But the truth of the matter is, it's very similar to, okay, I need to have my people ready to take an accident report, but then I need them ready to go and fight the house fire. And so to me, it kind of seems that it's parallel, but it has to be challenging for you to have your people fully engaged in both of those environments.
Well, it is definitely unique. We know that nationwide, 41% of all violence that occurs in a health system occurs in an emergency department. So we know that the highest level of violence is occurring there. And if you think about it, people are in a situation where they're experiencing a health emergency or their family members experiencing a health emergency, and there's a certain loss of control. We know that two of the largest things causing healthcare violence are long waits for care and crowded waiting rooms. We know that every health system in America right now has crowded waiting rooms and long waits for care. We need to be able to help prevent that proactively. And then when we're up in our maternity area, our NICUs, those are families that could be experiencing some significant health issues with their family, that they're under extreme stress. And how do we balance safety and support our staff and support our patients through some very trying times with family members who may be in the hospital for extended periods of time, sometimes months? And how can we support them through that journey? It's very challenging.
Listening to everything you've been saying, and you were talking about the perception that I'm safe. And it reminded me of an incident in the Houston airport where one of the biggest complaints they got at the Houston airport was the amount of time that they had to wait to get their luggage. And so the solution was something that they came up with that I would never have thought of, because I'm not that daggone smart, was they increased the distance that people had to walk to get to their luggage. So they rerouted the walkway so that by the time they get there, the wait time was less. It was still the same amount of time from the time the plane landed until they got their luggage, but their perception was they had to wait less time because it was closer to arrival at the luggage claim area and the luggage getting there. I don't want to say that people can sometimes be irrational, but their perception is their reality. And so when you start talking about the maternity ward, the NICU and that type thing, there's a balance. I want the family members to be able to visit this new member of the family. But I also have a responsibility to make sure that someone who shouldn't have access to that child doesn't have access. You're
absolutely right. It is such a double-edged sword, because we need to make sure that our caregivers are safe, and balancing that with the needs of the family, because we're all going to feel better if we have our loved ones with us as we're going through a traumatic event, especially something where you're in the hospital for an extended period of time. But that's where that community engagement really comes into play, where we are proactively going up and trying to meet a staff member when we're not on a call, so that when I do go up there on a call, now I know Mike. Now we've chatted before. Perhaps I know where Mike's from. And hopefully Mike's going to feel more empowered to say, Brian, this family down in bed number 31, we're having some challenges, and maybe we can go there and together we can de-escalate and provide them with the necessary resources.
All right, so I have to bring this up because it's one of the things that really shocked me when you and I talked and reading about your background. Community policing in a healthcare setting has to be a little bit different than community policing like it was in Kalamazoo. By and large, the residents are long-term in Kalamazoo, where the quote-unquote residents in your place are more transient because people come to the hospital for treatment, and then once treatment is over, they leave. But then I got to thinking, it would seem to me that if the relationship between your agency and the healthcare providers, if they feel safer, then that feeling of safety is going to be reflected and transferred to the patients that come there for care. It seems to me that that's how you really achieve that perception of safety, because if the healthcare providers don't feel safe, I don't think there's a chance that the people who come there for treatment are going to feel safe.
Oh, correct. Absolutely. And that's where it comes into, and we use this phrase over and over, we base everything on three pillars: trust, training, and technology. And the first part, that first word, trust, is where that community policing, community engagement comes in. How can we proactively, when we're not on a call, go up and engage people in a conversation about the weather, about sports, and let them know that me as a uniformed officer, I am a real person, and I am there to make sure that you get what you need, that you feel safe. We focus on what we call ambassadors first, security second. Ambassadors first, security second. So if we push, we actually give a class on customer service. What is customer service? And then we talk about what is compassion. In fact, you're probably familiar with Milo. We're working with Milo now, which is Multiple Interactive Learning Objectives, a company that does simulations that, Mike, you and I would use for training on shoot, don't shoot, where we train nurses using that without weapons, obviously. And we are now developing trauma-informed care scenarios so that we can train our staff that if Mike comes into the hospital, we don't want to re-traumatize him. How can I make sure I use the appropriate supporting language and stance to help support and not re-traumatize Mike and understand his background and where he comes from? And that will be one of the first in the nation to actually be using what would normally be used, a police simulator, to do trauma-informed care scenarios.
You're absolutely correct. The folks at Milo are fantastic individuals who are dedicated to making society safer. That program that you're talking about, that right there, that sounds exactly type of thing that we need to be doing. And I do have to bring this up because this is another thing that we talked about. One of the challenges that you have as a director is that I just don't want my part of my community there to feel like they're safe. I have to train my people so that they can help make it safe. And the reason why it was so important, and I was blown away by this stat, by the way, what you told me was that 73% of workplace violence that happens in a healthcare setting. And not to discount where it happens in other places, but in law enforcement, most of the active killer training focuses on school settings, and rightfully so, because we need to protect our most vulnerable. But people who are being treated medically and are often under the influence of some type of narcotic for the purposes of medical treatment, they're vulnerable as well. So your folks have to be that ambassador, but they also have to be willing to step up if that type of event were to occur.
Absolutely. It's so crucial. So that stat I talked about, that's an OSHA stat. And since then, there's been multiple other studies that have shown things like 2 nurses are assaulted every hour in the nation, which that's a Press Ganey stat, and I still think that's substantially lower. And you're absolutely right. We need to focus on those active shooter events. However, we never really do a deep data analysis on active shooters. And I always say we absolutely need it to train on active shooters. It's probably the number one thing I get asked to train on. But what we don't train enough on are those pre-incident indicators and behaviors of concern that give us pre-warning about the potential of an active shooter occurring. And we know that for schools, as an example, the FBI has done, and the Department of Justice have done extensive studies. We know that having a trusted relationship with a person in a position of authority, if I'm a student, that can help prevent me from moving down that pathway to intended violence and becoming an active shooter. So the number one thing I tell my staff, we should be focused on building those relationships. And it works in schools. The data is there. There's an excellent book, I believe it's called Trigger Point, that just came out that really talks about the importance of those relationships and does a deeper dive into the backgrounds of our active shooters.
2 friends of mine, they probably hate it when I call them friends, but I consider them friends, also do work with Milo, Greg Williams and Brian Marin of Arcadia Cognerati. The whole idea of human behavior, pattern recognition, and analysis, these things are so much better when we can spot the warning signs up front and either prevent or mitigate the damage that is done. And it's not just on active shooters. I mean, it's on a variety of things. When you're dealing with the wonderful people that provide the healthcare, Michigan healthcare systems, do you sometimes find that there is a reluctance or a lack of trust that your people have to overcome simply because it does seem like our roles are at odds with each other? And if there is so, then what's the best way of overcoming that you can share as a leader with the people that work for you?
So really great question. I think the world of Greg, I finally got the opportunity to meet him in person. I got to tell him we used all of that information from that Left of Bang Combat Hunters program that he developed and that he was there. And we use those concepts in our training here in the health system, and we've had incredible success there. So that's number one. Number two, you are right. On its face, people can not understand the why behind the need for police officers in a health system, the need for a canine team in the health system, because those can cause a negative impact on some communities. We know that. So the only way that I have found to be able to deal with that is going out and sitting down and meeting with people in person and talking to them over coffee and explaining the why and getting people involved in our decision-making program. And I'll give you a great example of what I mean. We went and had our members of our anti-racism team here at Michigan Medicine. We took them to Milo out at Washtenaw Community College, and we ran them all through it, not the weapons portion. We ran them through what we teach nurses, the situational awareness, the proxemics. We showed them the videos, and we showed how you can build your own videos with it. You can build your own program. They were so impressed that they were at the point where, like, we need to buy our own, then to build our own program and our own training sessions. So that doesn't happen on email. Those relationships, they take effort, they take continual communication, but those are powerful, powerful times when you can bring someone and say, look, this is the why behind what we train like this, and then have a different perspective. And they came forward and said, you know what? We can use this in other ways as well.
Well, transparency is a word that's thrown around a lot in public and private sector. Transparency really should be about establishing trust, about that relationship that I can have with another human being that is going to allow both of us to accomplish our missions. And I think that that's incredibly important. But as we're wrapping things up here, I do have to ask you, would you agree with me that internally, if my people don't trust me, it's going to be much more difficult for them to build trust with members of the community?
You hit the nail on the head, Mike. Absolutely. You can't lead without trust.
And if we can't lead without trust, it's very difficult to provide safety for people who don't trust us. I think we've seen that in our law enforcement organizations, and I would be willing to bet that the people who feel most safe at the University of Michigan healthcare systems are the ones who trust you the most.
And I think we have to realize as leaders, building trust is something you need to do every single day. You need to work on it continuously. When you think you're doing a great job, you're not. And when you think you've communicated enough, you haven't. And when you think you built enough trust, you haven't. And it's a continual process.
All right. So I have some takeaways, at least some things I'm going to take away from the conversation, but I always want to make sure that I give you the opportunity to say, no, Mike, you got that all wrong. All right. So here's some of the points I'm going to take away, and I hope our listeners do. Number one, a leader should be willing to say, I don't know, but once they get to that point, they need to go and learn it. That vulnerability is only good for the first couple times that you pull out that I don't know about the same topic. Eventually, you do need to learn that information.
Mike, you hit the nail on the head. You are absolutely, I could not have said it better myself.
And I'm stealing these right here, but if I tell you I'm stealing them, it's not plagiarism. Just throwing that out there. Trust your staff. You know, many leaders that they talk about how, hey, I need you guys to trust me that I've got your best interest at heart, but that's never going to happen if they don't feel that you trust them.
I would take it a step further. Not only trust them, but don't micromanage them. Give them the mission and allow them to execute that mission as they see fit.
Beautifully said. Create a culture where they feel free to disagree.
Absolutely.
Man, you know, I think that's probably of all the takeaways, I think that one's probably the hardest for people, because for some reason in society today, we see people disagreeing with me as being disrespectful. They don't like me. We read into this a whole bunch of things that we really shouldn't be reading into it.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And that comes from leaders who are not confident enough to admit that they are wrong and not confident enough to admit when they make a mistake. I've made hundreds of mistakes, and our best learning, our best experience comes from mistakes and not from our triumphs.
The science shows that we will remember it longer and stronger if we get it wrong the first time, as long as there's something there to set us on the right path. Next takeaway, leaders, get out of the office. And I'm going to add a different little spin on it there. Staying in your office creates its own unique type of tunnel vision. We see everything from the perspective, from the lens of our office, which is not the lens of reality.
Again, very well said.
Finally, this is often thrown around, but it couldn't be any more true. Actions speak louder than words. Your words don't matter if your actions are saying something else.
Perfectly said. We've all heard that 100 times, but it can always be reinforced.
Director, this conversation was even gooder than I thought it was going to be. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. We're going to send you something here soon there to help us fill out the episode page. I would love for you to include some of the links to some of the stuff that you're talking about, so, things about the University of Michigan healthcare system that make it unique, that make it, and boy, this makes it hard for somebody who doesn't like University of Michigan football, you know, make it one of the best healthcare systems, not only in America, but in the world. So we'd love if you'd share some of those links with us when we send that to you, so we can put that out there for the listeners.
Absolutely. And Mike, thanks for having me today. I very much appreciate it.
All right, folks. Well, there's a wrap on another episode. We thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed the episode, and I say this all the time, we sure as heck hope you did, be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast provider. You can also find this episode and all previous episodes on our website at commandpresence.net/podcast. Also, be sure to check us out on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, and follow us, and so you can stay up to date on what's happening with us. But as we close, the same reminder every week, folks, please remember, be the leader you wish you had.